Welcome to the Church Office podcast. If you're joining us on video, thank you for being here. We've got Tony Graham here today, which I'm really excited to have you on, mate. And he's got so much experience, and that's why we've signed you up, mate, to come.
Okay, all right. I'm looking forward to it.
It's your first podcast. So,
Yeah. I was listening to Linda's podcast from a few weeks ago, and she said she was this was her first podcast, and I woke up actually quite nervous this morning. So we'll see how it goes.
We'll see how it goes. Yeah, he's brilliant, and he's got so much experience. And today's topic is really, we're going to focus on church planting, and the importance of church administration in that process. And lots of guys go out there and do church planting, and some are supported and some are not. And there are lots of things that we want to cover and encourage you today. So we're going to touch on those things. Okay. But before we do that, Tone, give us a bit about history about yourself, because you were involved in Christ Church where we are today 25 years ago, part of the leadership team. Yeah,
I was one of the originals, I suppose. I mean, I've been part of the church for the 25 plus years that we've been here. I've actually been hanging around Pete and Jenny and some of the others for 30 plus years. So I was part of the church that Pete used to lead up in the Midlands, in Coventry. So that was a good experience. I was reflecting with Norma on the fact that we've known you nearly 30 years as well.
It's crazy.
Been around a while, been a Christian for, nearly 40 years now. Brilliant. I think later this year will be 40 years. So, so been around since the beginning. Trained as a lawyer. At the end of the 90s, I qualified as a lawyer, so 20 plus years ago. Worked for one of the largest law firms in Wales, so that was good. I was 10 years in private practice as a solicitor, but I was part of the church. I was serving in the church. I was a group leader here for many years. In the beginning and beforehand. Love serving in the church. Always served in the church. Norma and I used to help lead the teens. I remember when you were in the teens, Gav, and we went off to Rouen. We went
in the minibus, trip to France.
Driving you in the minibus to Rouen. We've taken you to different trips to different theme parks. We were remembering some of your antics at theme parks, but we won't get into that. What goes?
No stories today.
All right, no stories. But no, I was reflecting that it's just been great fun. There's a whole bunch of us that have been mates, that have served God, that have preached the gospel, that have built churches together, and that's just been great fun.
Yeah, that friendship, that community, being in the church for a long time. For me, it's great. I've grown up in the church. And now to be able to serve the church it's a privilege, isn't it? And
I find that. I mean, we've raised our boys in the church. You've babysat our boys when they were little. So that intergenerational stuff, and the fact we got some of the dearest saints in the church, and then we got all these babies being born in the church. I just love.
It's great.
I love what's been built here. It's tremendous.
Oh, mate, that's encouraging. So from being a lawyer, then you've trained in that. How did you get involved in Christian ministry then? What was the transfer from that?
That's a great question. It's one of those things where I've always, you hear people talk about this sense of call. This sense of wanting to serve God in a particular way. So I guess I felt that for many years, beforehand. In 2010, 2012. Going back to 2004, actually, this was. In the summer, we moved to America for 12 months. Now, that was the culmination of a process of conversation and lots of prayer and lots of conversation with the leaders here. And I'd been a group leader, but I'd really felt that God wanted me to do a little bit more. Wanted me to sacrifice for him. And so I went to the partner of the law firm I was working for.
That's an interesting conversation.
It really was. And I'll tell you about that because I've always been very clear about my faith wherever I work. It's sometimes that's difficult, but it's worth doing. But I sat down with him and said, look, I'm really feeling the sense of I've got to go into church leadership. And he said, it's going to be very difficult for me to argue with God, isn't it? and that was it. There was just this fascinating conversation. I said, look, it is really.
It really is,
But I was just driven by that sense. Norma and my wife had sort of talked about it long. And sometimes there are just some things you've got to do. So we felt that it was the right thing to do. So I gave up my legal career to go and see what God wanted me to do.
And so you went to America. Really, it was linked with a group of churches that we were part of to their pastors' college, essentially, wasn't it?
That's right.
And it was a year of
so
just
we
ministry training, I suppose.
Yeah, we were out there. I was doing, a theological qualification, and we did that for just under a year, and then came back and did a year's internship. So tremendous experience. I mean, I have lots of questions about the church culture in America and things like that. But it was a great year. It really was. It challenged us. It provoked us. We learned loads. We learned about family, about marriage, about and talked to a lot of church planters while I was out there. I didn't know that was what specifically I was going to do when we went, but over the year met a guy called Gareth Lloyd who became a good friend of this church and myself. And when I came back, he'd become part of the church here. And he and I did an internship for a year then here in Christchurch, which was just a tremendous year. We really enjoyed that. We had a lot of fun.
Doing that together. And so God was stirring something in you at that point, wasn't he? To obviously you've gone away, done some leadership development, done some training, ministry training. And then what does that deployment look like? I suppose was the question of you were asking then.
It was. Well, this church had already planted churches to Sydney in Australia. We'd planted a church to Bristol.
That's right.
And we'd helped with lots of other situations and lots of other churches. So in some ways, we were going through this season of looking to see how, rather than the church just become bloated and big, actually there was a real sense that God wanted us to do this. So when we came back, Pete was, very clear, and the leaders were very clear. We don't think you're called to ministry in this church, but maybe it's a good thing for you, and Gareth was there, to consider planting another church. Now, Gareth was from the Valleys. I married a girl from Merthyr. We knew loads of people in Merthyr Tydfil, 20 miles north of us here in Christchurch. And so in many ways, Merthyr was a bit of a natural choice for us. We had family, we had friends. Gareth's family lived close by. We knew loads of people there. We knew it was, an old industrial valleys town that needed the gospel. There were some good churches there, but we felt there was lots of opportunities to go there. So we used to go up, Gareth and I used to go up, and we would just sort of, walk around or drive round and pray for the town and just ask God, was it the right thing to do?
Is this where you want us to be?
And that's the way he led us, and we were incredibly well encouraged and supported by the church here. When we talked it through with the leaders here, there was a real sense of, well, okay, let's see what happens.
I suppose we start a conversation about church planting maybe here a little bit, is that there are lots of different models, aren't there? And you essentially had a great opportunity to go away for a year, be trained, come back, establish a relationship with Gareth, and then go and church plant together while being supported and connected to a local church. And there, I'm sure as we get into the conversation, that is going to be a real strength in church planting.
It really is. One of the things you asked me to think about was what do you need in the background to help? And I know we'll get into that a little bit later, but there's no doubt that having the support and encouragement of this church to go forward, and whether, for a church planter, whether it's their home church or another church. I know lots of church planters who develop relationships with other churches that have a heart for them and want to support them. So I don't think it really matters which church it is, but you do need someone. You do need someone to partner with you, to pray for you and to support you.
And that is a key message.
Reflecting on our time when we went up to Merthyr, and I think this goes back to what Pete was saying. Pete very intentionally, deliberately sent up two guys who were very different in their gifting. So I would be less of a preacher, more of a teacher, more of an organizer, more of a, helping stuff to happen. Gareth was and is a gifted preacher and an expositor of God's word. So Pete did that. That was the kindness of God bringing us together, developing a friendship. But Pete set us into those roles. The church set us into those roles very, very deliberately.
Yeah.
And it was almost like a model of what he'd created here, what he'd done here. And you know, look, in God's grace, over that 6-year period, we went up with, I think it was between 30 and 40 folk. And the church grew to 120, 150 folk, you know, over that 6-year period. So now that's not, I don't say that to you know, be big-headed or whatever. That was clearly God's grace. Because, you know, the folk that know me and Gareth know we're a bit rubbish, really. But it seemed to work. So Gareth was able to spend his days reading, studying, preparing, without having to worry about where will we be meeting? Who will switch the lights on? Who will make sure that the children's ministry is sorted out? Who will make sure that I get paid this month? Who will ensure that the folk are, you know, give in and we're getting enough money each month to pay the bills and to pay the salaries and whatever. So being able to create the foundation and the framework for the gospel to happen. That's how I saw my role. And I would argue you and your team here and other church administrators, that's what you do. You create. I always used to talk about what I do is I build the platform and I let others get on there and preach the gospel and God do his work.
So church administration is vital in church planting. That's what we're saying. That's our starting point here. Tell us a bit about your some of the real highlights of being involved in it, and what are some of the challenges as well that you faced in that role, serving in that way.
So for me, highlights, there are some obvious highlights. Building friendships, seeing the gospel preached, they're the sort of overarching themes. But it was affecting people's lives with the truth of the gospel was it's been a joy reflecting back on it, because I was thinking about 3 members of our family who became Christians during this period. My wife's niece Keris, her sister Anne, and brother-in-law Clive. Now Clive and I we'd argued over the dinner table for 30 years about the gospel. You know, Norma and I have been married 35 years, and we had gone to, you know, he was, you know, a bit of a socialist. He was a bit of a, you know, anti the gospel, anti-church, you know, stuff like that. And we'd gone back and forth. But within a year or so of the church starting, they were coming to the church. They were joining in some of the community stuff we were doing, and he became a Christian.
Amazing.
And so you know, and Gareth's dad became a Christian during this period, Steve. And family members, but not just family members, other people we'd never met before. We were just meeting them, doing community stuff. And so for me, church plants, and I've been thinking a lot about this, church plants must be about winning people for the Saviour. One of the things that church plants have to be really careful of is respecting the local churches that are already there, and honouring the work that they've done. We built some great friendships, you know, with one guy in particular, Andy Pitt, who was, you know, pastor of one of the local Baptist churches, as far away from us in practice and methodology, but really close in theology. And we developed a really good friendship. I think Andy's leading a church here in Newport now.
He is now. That's right.
Just the most godly man. We had to respect guys like that. You know, build a friendship with people like that. But don't do transfer growth. I mean, that was you know the phrase, don't you? We really didn't want to see that. We felt that we were going to reach those that you know, the people that we came into contact with, not others. So there were. I mean, I'm not going to deny the fact that it was a challenging season. You know, there are all sorts of pressures and all sorts of challenges during that period. You asked me to to think about.
Yeah, because I think these are important, aren't they?
Yeah.
People face these and.
Well, look, I wrote down that developing friendships and being on the front line with people, it did feel a bit like a battle.
Yeah.
You are going into territory that the gospel really hasn't been in before.
Yeah.
Families and communities that in our country, in the UK and in Wales particularly, we've got such a rich history and tradition of faith and the work of the gospel in people's lives. You will know about the revivals 120, 130 years ago. We have a rich tradition, and up in the valleys there's this chapel culture still.
Yeah.
And going up there and sort of waging war, not just, and I don't want to get weird or freaky about that. I'm not one of these people that says, we're going to shout over the town and whatever.
Yeah.
God bless those people. That's not my style.
Yeah.
But we felt that we were just, we were challenging the culture, that culture of apathy, that culture of hedonism, that looking out for yourself and looking for pleasure.
Yeah.
And so taking the gospel into a situation like that was a real battle.
Yeah.
And so building the friendships, with our friends, the Johnsons, the Richleys, the Hands, all of these guys, there's so many, the Clarks, another family who are part of the church here now.
Yeah.
People that we just did battle with together.
Yeah.
And it was great fun. Yeah. And when we reflect back on it, yes, challenges, yes, tiring, yes, mental stress, yes, all of that stuff, but huge joy. I learned a lot about community development while I was there, and the fact that the church can really do a tremendous amount of good just by serving people. So, food bank is an example, but we did street pastors. We set up Merthyr Street pastors. We did a homeless drop-in. We set up the night shelter. We did lots of these projects, both by ourselves and with other churches. And I remember sitting with the chief constable of South Wales Police at an event, a street pastors event, and I was sitting next to him at this event, and he was telling us, we think that street pastors in Merthyr over the last year saved us nearly £1 million in police costs and right? blah, 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 blah. And it was an opportunity just to talk about the work of the church and why we did what we did and what the values were and whatever. So, and it's happening here, all the stuff that we're involved in and talking to assembly members and whatever. The church, I think in the last 10 years, the church has had tremendous opportunities to be salt and light, to be an example of the Saviour to people, that sacrificial love, care and concern for people in a very real and practical way. We have to share the gospel because it is all about transforming on the inside and thinking about your eternal future. But there is a here and now that this church does well, that we really worked at, and I really enjoyed that. And I suppose that's where I really gained a love and an affection and a passion for community work, I suppose.
I think it's a great point because church administration or church management in that, you're applying it into community there, aren't you? In organising all these different events, all these different projects, all with the motivation to reach people with the gospel.
Exactly.
That's what we're there for. That's what we're about. And your role there hugely enables that to happen, doesn't it? Which is incredible. So Gareth he's not necessarily involved in all this community stuff, is he? He's thinking about church, teaching, programs, and all these things. So you've been able to release him.
Marriages that are breaking down and families that are struggling.
The crises that are happening. He's able to go and bring God's word to bear there and care for people. And yet you've then enabled and mobilised the church to go, right, we don't want to just be inward. We don't want to just build a better kids ministry or better teens ministry or better church in a sense, church life. but we're about this and that focus of going out there with the gospel.
Just to be clear, I mean, Gareth and I would talk about all these things. And
of course, you were involved in it together. Yeah,
and he would often initiate stuff, and so I don't want to sort of give the impression I'm going off doing all this stuff. And look how brilliant it was. It was very much a partnership, a team effort. But you're right. It's the who's the person that can make stuff happen?
Yeah.
Now, I'd organise stuff, with the teens and in leadership here in the church over decades. When we used to go away on church weekends away, and we'd organise the sports day and all that sort of stuff. So I was used to doing stuff. So I think over time the church and my job had enabled me to grow in those skills. Yeah. But you're absolutely right, because it's all very well having an idea for a night shelter.
Yeah.
But someone has to make contact with the people that already do it.
Yeah.
Someone has to go and have a look at how it works.
Yeah.
Someone has to develop a project plan.
Yeah. Yeah.
Someone has to figure out how we're going to pay for this.
Yeah.
Someone has to say, okay, we need a team of volunteers to make this happen. Yeah. What training's involved? What safeguarding's involved? What are the legal niceties of this? Yeah. And which part of the building we're going to use? When we're going to do it? Yeah. And it's that stuff that Norma often laughs at me. I really enjoy that. And I know you do as well, Gav. Yeah. And there are some weird people in the church that actually really enjoy putting together a project plan and really enjoy doing a spreadsheet for the finances, for how it's going to work, and setting up and creating a policy and talking, having the meetings. I do enjoy that, and I was very fortunate. I was able to do that in an environment where something else I was passionate about, the gospel. Mm-hmm. I was creating this platform, creating this foundation. So the people that come in on the night shelter, we do it here. The people that come into the homeless drop-in centre, some of the most deprived, challenged people in Merthyr, in the valleys. But to build a friendship and to see just one or two of them over 6 years come to faith was hugely exciting. To go out on the streets, with the street pastors and talk to young people, they're going from one pub to the other, and talk to them about their values, talk to them about, why they were out drinking. And once a person's had a couple of drinks, they're always ready to be honest and tell you their life story. And just talking to people like that. And again, you're building friendships, you're being salt and light to people, but someone's got to create that. Someone's got to bring the team together, and the guys who watch and listen to you, they really have to see, that's what they're doing. It's as important as everything else that goes on in the church. I would argue sometimes a little bit more. Now, I'm not saying it's more important than preaching the gospel or teaching the word of God or whatever. But it is really, really crucial to get it done well. Yeah. And if it's not done well, it can be a bit of a disaster.
Yeah, no, that is absolutely true. Yeah. And so if you're a pastor or you're a minister connecting in here, I mean, you had the luxury of being, full time, you and Gareth, which is great. Yeah. But it's possible, it is possible, and we've seen it, lots of church plants where they've identified people in a voluntary role to do these things. Yeah. And it might be that it's spread slightly wider than just one person coordinating it. But it's so important to be able to assess that. You were able to go with a team, so there was already some degree of assessment of people's gifting. And
well, there was, Gavin, and I do think that's a really important, that whole aspect of the voluntary or serving in the church, I think is really undervalued often. There are lots and lots of people. I mean, what I didn't say was, in my spare time, I'm a school governor, I'm a community counsellor, I do disciplinary work down at Social Care Wales. I've done lots of stuff. And the reason I do all that stuff is there's lots of things I enjoy. And there's lots of things that I want to do in my spare time. So there are lots of people in the church that want to serve. And I think we're a little bit afraid. I don't think we're afraid of it here, but I think a lot of churches are afraid of saying, is there anyone that's just got a few hours spare? We could really do with some help in this area. And I don't think folks should be afraid of doing that. Right. We are called to be servants. And if that means anything, then we have to find ways to serve,
What other recommendations have you got for people who are going into church plants? I mean, I know you talked about other churches and leaders, and we talked a little bit about that. What other things have you got that you could recommend?
Yeah. Been in leadership roles now for 30, 35 years. And one of the things that I suppose I'm still learning is don't rush anything.
Yeah.
Of course you have to make snap decisions and whatever, but in terms of projects and planning and some of these things we're talking about, and church planting is a perfect example where you're talking about a massive multi-dimensional effort. It is if you were to give it a Gantt chart, it would go to 2 or 3 pages because there's so much involved in the process. I was listening to Jen's podcast on the Olympics, and when we planned the gathering, and I remember sitting in those meetings with her with her big massive charts, but if we didn't do that, it wouldn't have gone as well. So I don't think we should be afraid of it. Now the church is a lot messier, and it can be a bit untidy sometimes. I remember when Christ Church started, we were like nomads going from school to school, trying to find a home, trying to find a base. Setting up the chairs, sometimes the mics didn't work. You're setting up, or you're trailing the leads, across a school floor and whatever. So church is messy, and much as you try and organise stuff, if you haven't got all the resources or all the people, it's really uncomfortable. But don't worry about that. You can still have a degree of organisation. Look for the people. Find the people that are able to say, yes, I know it's a bit messy, but at least I know the wires have to be trailed across the floor. At least I know that we need to set up a little mini desk. At least I know we've got to pay the rent on this. At least I know we've got to have a look at the contract with the local authority to hire the school. Because if you don't do all that stuff, you're going to get bitten in the bum, to be honest. Something will come back and bite you.
And those things all facilitate the gospel going out. And if you make the connection, sorting out the insurance and ensuring that it's safe, ensuring that we've got the venue, and the heating's on in the venue, all those things affect actually the person who's listening to the gospel, in that moment. They're going to come back again if they feel it is comfortable. If the heating is on, they might come back the next time. If it isn't on, they probably won't.
And
in the early days, what you're talking there as well, it's really challenging to bring excellence into every single area of the church plant and all the different things that you want to bring. But actually, how can we remove some of the obstacles that are there to the end goal of we want to tell people about Jesus? And so, look at those major obstacles first. And, if you're in your church and you've got some of the skills and you haven't been recognised, then talk to your pastor about these things. Do you know what? I'm good at organising things. I'm good at setting stuff up. Go and offer yourself to your pastor.
Exactly.
I'd love to see people do that in a voluntary way. Don't wait to be asked as well.
Yeah. Well, Gav, you and I have both grown up in this church, and we started off doing the little jobs. We started off doing small things and doing it for our elders, our pastors, or whatever. It might be just organising the kids' meeting. So it might, it might be a relatively small thing in a relatively small situation, but that's okay. That's how you learn. That's I've got some junior members of staff, and they want to grow and they want to learn, and so I'm giving them small projects to work on because they've got to learn. I did. I think the first ever, house group that I led, there was like 6 or 7 people in it, and including me and Norma, and it wasn't very good. And if there are any members of that group, I do apologise.
They still remember it.
They still bear the scars. But you see, my point is, you start off with little stuff. So I think, your point about making the offer, your elder, your pastor, your leader, it's going to do his heart,
really
his or her heart good to have that offer, from you, because they've probably got a million ideas, a million things they want to do, because they're good at vision, they're good at stuff like that, but they know that maybe we can't do all of this stuff. And so when someone is stirred by God to serve, then that's an answer to their prayer as well.
Yeah, I've heard Pete say numerous times, I don't know who the best person to ask is.
Yeah.
And that's so true. So that's by good. You offering, they don't always know that you're the right person.
And you said something in the video that you and he did, and you said sometimes you'll just go through the church list. And you'll look for, I wonder how they'd respond. I think this is their job, and therefore they probably have some transferable skills. And so guys involved in church planting, have a look at the people.
Absolutely right.
Don't be afraid to do that, and don't be afraid to have a coffee, sit down, have them around for a meal, and have a chat and say, look, what do you think? Pray about it.
Absolutely right.
And that, I think that's something that the church should always do. In our family, we have to pitch in sometimes. We all have to do stuff. And this is family.
Yes.
And so everybody has to pitch in and do. It might be a small thing, or it might be a really big thing.
What other things have you got that you could recommend?
Something I would recommend to people: keep the gospel central, not just in what you talk about, but in what you apply. Do community stuff. Do normal, real, ordinary stuff as well. Make friends. So, because church planting, ministry generally, church planting especially, can be all-consuming. It can, I would go to bed thinking about the meeting the following day, or someone I was going to see, or an event I had to organise, and I'm sure you do this. It's all consuming, and church planting, because there's so much more pressure on you. Because here, we've got a big church, you can delegate jobs and you can go to bed and go to sleep. I've got to get up the following day and help set up the chairs and make sure that, if someone's ill, someone's got to step in and teach the kids. And so church planting is really demanding and really consuming, but you need something else. You need not a distraction, that's the wrong word, but normality. So, you and I love our football. I remember watching you as an apprentice down at Cardiff City and all that, when you had your contract and stuff. We used to take our boys down to watch Cardiff play football. We were season ticket holders. We would do ordinary stuff. I would take them to football. I know you do that with your kids. You take them to lots of different things and you encourage them. And that normality, sometimes that's the pressure gate, the valve. You can let some of that stress and some of that strain go. I enjoy politics. I enjoyed politics, so I got involved in some of that, and that was a good release. And for different people listening, I would say find that reality. Now, often you get the crossovers then. So I would do lots of football stuff, but then you might invite someone to church, or you might, So I do think doing community is a bit of a two-way street, but find some things that you enjoy that are grounded, if that makes sense.
I think that's a really good point, because it's so, in ministry on a church plant, this all-consuming nature. It's, you work with people, they're also your friends. You're involved in a community, where you live, and it's very hard to draw any kind of boundaries, isn't it? And clear boundaries of, so-and-so's ringing me on Friday night, and I think, is this work or is this friendship? Is it not? Is it what? We go out for dinner with Pete, and the temptation is to talk about work and talk about how the church is doing and what we should be doing more, and reevaluating and assessing and all those things that are going on. But those things that you're talking about, switching off and being able to go and do something normal and fun. One of the best bits of advice that Pete gave me was you've got all these friends in the church, but go and get some friends outside the church. They're actually not impressed that you're involved in ministry. They don't know anything really about.
And some of them think you're a bit weird as well, don't you?
And you try and
keeps
talk
you humble.
And it's and those things are great. So we can.
I'll tell you something I did, Gav. I qualified as a referee, as you know. I was a referee in South Wales valleys for a long time, and going out on a Saturday afternoon. And being sworn at, and everybody telling you exactly what they thought about your decisions. That's a way of staying grounded.
That's definitely the worst job in the world, isn't it? Being a referee.
Yeah, but again, I say I am a little bit weird like that. And maybe it's the control freak in me. I don't know, but I really enjoyed the being able to bring order. And it's a bit, I'm not going to read too much into that, but there is something about organising and ordering the game, knowing the rules better than anyone else, and being able to apply those rules. Maybe that's just me being a bit weird.
No, it's good, because I think the whole thing for me, like the whole sporting illustration, is great. I just love it. So even to talk about church planting. So you play for. I was talking about this with Penny from a church in Bolton, and we were saying that our kids play on a team, and they always play on the same team. The name doesn't change, but the pitch gets bigger. Like the ball changes, the goals change, like the rules change,
exactly.
The number of players, and you play in different positions, and then suddenly you actually find a position that you go, oh, actually, I'm really effective here for the team.
That's a really good analogy.
And thank you, Penny. But we were chatting about it and thinking, actually, it is such a good way to think about it, isn't it?
It really is. And I was thinking about, remember setting up the football team here. Yeah. And I know, sorry, for everybody, Pete will be cursing us because he can't stand football. We love football, Pete. But just thinking about Christchurch, the football club that you and I see, I managed it, you were my captain, and all this sort of stuff. And what, that was a really interesting time, because we were able to, again, talking about this community doing normal stuff, we were able to draw guys that wouldn't normally come to church. Right. And a number of them are still here and still coming, and they've become key members of the church. Good.
So let's move on to one thing which I think we've kind of started on. So
people are saying, let's move on to the end.
No, not yet, because I think this is a big question, because burnout in church planting is huge, isn't it? Not just for the leader, and there's a whole nother podcast on that, isn't it? But protecting people, because we're saying everyone has to chip in, everyone has to play a role. You just look at if you were to write a list, even just delivering a Sunday morning, and you're in a venue that you don't belong to, you've got all the setting up, all the ministry stuff to do, and then you've got the clear up, and then so just think about that one day that you have to deliver. All of this has got, this isn't just 1 week, this is every week, and you want to make an impact in the community, so you're doing more, you're putting on more, there's loads of opportunities that suddenly come your way, and suddenly then you're in a situation where you might have taken on too much, or and understanding if your capacity is hard to manage and learn in that initial bit. But what burnout, how do we stop that burnout? Give us some, have you got any thoughts on this?
It's something I have thought about, for a long time. There have been times when I've been burnt out. And there have been times when I've been overwhelmed with mental stress, and I would argue potentially depression on times, because I enjoy doing stuff, and I enjoy leading stuff, and I enjoy getting stuff done. I often make the mistake of taking on too much. So you touched on that, and I think that's a massive issue. So And again, I think a lot of it comes down to the physical issues and the mental issues. So you got to differentiate between the two, Gav. And I think in society we don't do that, and in the church we really don't do this enough. So I'm going to say some stuff that might cause people to go, oh, I'm not sure about that, but bear with me. So I think that Christians can suffer mental anxiety, mental health issues, etc., etc. Just because we're Christians, it is not a barrier to us struggling with these things. I think we should just be honest about that. We are human. So you ask me, how do you manage burnout? Realize you're just a human. You've got limited energy, you've got limited time, and you've got limited resources. And there's massive demand on that. Because if you're involved in church planting, yes, you've got this overwhelming passion and burden for the town or the village or the city where you are, the area where you are. So that's consuming you. Never goes away.
And you've got that clarity that God's called you to this place, isn't it? So there's this sense of, right, we've got to do this.
Exactly right. You know what God has called you to do, so you're driven by that. You then have the people that you brought with you, whether it's 2 or 30, they've got their issues. They still need looking after. So they might come all motivated and encouraged and stirred, I'll guarantee you within 6 months there's going to be some big issues there. So you're pastoring them.
Yes.
You're then seeing baby Christians coming into the church. And they're vomiting all over the place. We've got a couple of little granddaughters. We've got a new 4-week-old granddaughter, and she's vomiting all over the place at the moment. Now she is gorgeous. Can I say for James and Katie, she's a delight. Elsie Harper, we love her to bits, but she has her feeds and she's a bit sick. and the same with the other granddaughters. So you've got these baby Christians, and they're being ill. And they're creating problems and they're creating challenges. You're then involved in community projects. And that's before we even get to preparation for the meeting, setting up, doing all the organizational stuff, and whether it's you or someone else preparing to preach the word. So massive pressure and stress. Recognize you can't do it all. So write down the key things. What are the 3 or 4 key things you've got to do this week? And talk to the people around you. Have a couple of close people, whether they're, if you're the pastor in the church, and you've got a couple of elders around you or a couple of deacons, talk to them about that. Be honest about it. Be honest about your own struggles. I think Christian pastors, leaders, the thing that we don't do enough is talk about our struggles. We didn't. No, let me rephrase that. We did to a degree. We could have done it better. And I wish we had been more honest about our struggles. So I would encourage people to, there's a lot of stuff about mental health around at the moment, and men's mental health particularly. And there's this hashtag, it's good to talk. It really is, and it's good just to be honest with a few people. So how do you avoid burnout? First of all, you will get stressed. Just live with that. You have got lots of pressure, live with that. You are limited in what you can do, live with that. But make sure that there's a few people around you who you open up and you say to them, I can only do this thing, and this thing. And when people tell you or whisper to you that I'm doing a rubbish job, can you just tell them why? And it's having that protection of good friends around you. So I think your partner is absolutely fundamental to this. Tell them when you're struggling. Help them to understand. Norma and I have been on this journey. Norma is one of, Norma, she works great here in the church. She's one of the sweetest, loveliest, most sane people I know. And she's really consistent. Norma doesn't have highs and lows. She's just consistent.
She is.
And she just loves life and loves people and just gets on with stuff. I'm very much up and down. I'm like a roller coaster. I'll have a few days when life is brilliant and everyone's brilliant and let's have all these people around. And I'll have other days where I go, I don't want to talk to anyone. I'm staying in bed this morning. I don't care. And I have to learn to manage that, and I have to challenge myself because that is my sin to a degree, isn't it? But talk to your partner. So Norma will, come alongside and say, now this is that, isn't it? That's the thing that we talked about. Now come on, preach the gospel to yourself, remind yourself, and back up your ideas. Sometimes often I will respond, but sometimes I won't. And it's recognizing that, sometimes it's hard. And it's okay to have a bit of a fug. Sometimes, it's okay to have a bad day. It's okay to stay at home sometimes and just not do anything when we shouldn't be afraid of that, but let people know, be honest about that. And the other thing I would talk about, burnout and stress. Take time off.
Absolutely right.
Take a couple of days a week off. The challenge for guys in church leadership is, Sunday, the day that's most people's day off, they're working and they're working flipping hard. And I know that you guys are here long before we rock up, and you're here long after. I jump in my car and go and have my lunch. So Sunday is maybe a half or 2/3 of that is a working day. Now, I know you're probably able to have lunch with friends or tea or whatever, you get with your family and whatever. But there has to be at least one other day that you just relax. You go and walk by the sea. Mm-hmm. You go and read a book. You go and play football. You go to the cinema. You take your wife out for a meal. You take the kids, to wherever. Yeah. You must do that. Yeah. And that's I think the problem for church planters, there's always 100 things to do.
Everything's urgent, isn't it?
Do you remember that phrase we used to talk about, the tyranny of the urgent? Yeah. There are so many things. It's like this tyrannical master, your to-do list. Now, I have two sorts of to-do lists. Mm-hmm. Now, I've learned over the years, I have a daily to-do list that has like 4 or 5 things maximum on it. And then I've got my medium term, my goals and projects to-do list. And I only ever look at that once a week or once a fortnight. Because if I put everything on the list, that is just going to overwhelm me. Yeah, and I remember I used to have everything on the same list when we were church planting. And it was during that period that I learned to separate. And I learned to take the stuff about, we're looking for a building. And one of the things we did do was to develop our own building up in Merthyr. So that's a huge project. So I took that off my daily list because that's a project. I didn't want it there reminding me every day, being a tyrannical, master. The other, and finally, the other thing I would say, there's loads of things you could say, but the other thing I would say is take a long holiday every year. At least 10 days. Now that's going to freak a whole bunch of leaders and elders and church planters out. Honestly, if you don't have at least one period in the year where you shut down, your head will eventually explode. Yeah, it will. Because of that pressure.
That's true.
And now that's hard. And that is, most guys say, I'll go away for a week and it's fine. Honestly, I would argue you take 3 days to unwind. And then the 2 days before you're coming home, you're starting to think again about stuff. So actually, if you're only taking 7 days, you've only got 2 days in the middle. I would say go away somewhere for 10 days, 2 weeks if you can do it. And one of the things again that Pete encourages is take your holidays. Because and that's why a number of our guys have longevity in leadership. You've been doing this job for decades now. Pete's been doing it for decades now. He wasn't always good at this, but he's become better. Disappearing down to West Wales, going away, taking time. He's good at that, and I think guys should think about that.
And there's a real positive thing here actually, is that when you start a church plant, you can start these patterns. You can start these behaviours. You can do this from the beginning. So if you're going into a situation, then it's harder. But taking the holiday is crucial. I love what you're saying about being honest. Having people that you can be honest with and say, "Here's where I'm at. Here's where I'm struggling. Here's what's going on in my head. Would you pray with me? Will you help me through this?" And recognizing those weaknesses. And you're right. We don't have those conversations. And the Sabbath. Is so important, isn't it, to have those?
It's
we're gonna. They're teaching on it. But yet, they don't always take the Sabbaths. And
and I don't think we don't remind ourselves how biblical it is to rest. Mm-hmm. It absolutely is biblical. Pete preaches about it. The guys preach about it, on a regular basis. It's a proven medical fact that you need a period of sleep and a period of rest each week. It is a fact that it's an unusual person who can work for 6-7 days a week, week in, week out. That's a very unusual person. And we know of guys who have burnt out because they weren't prepared to just hold their hand up and say, I need to take some time. And I would argue, Gav, the other thing that and again in church planting it's really difficult, ministry generally, we're called to care for, love and sacrifice for our wives. If we are pour at that with our time, our energy, our resources. Norma and I always used to go out once a week on a date night.
Yeah.
Now, some people see that as a bit of an old-fashioned thing. I
love it.
I think it's, you've got to carve out. It's a lot easier for us now because, generally we have the house to ourselves.
Every night's date night.
Every night's date night. Well, I'm not sure she'd say that, but, I come home grumpy from work. That doesn't feel like a date night to her. But we do. Like, we will regularly go, I hope I don't offend people, we'll regularly go to the local pub for a meal and a drink and just get away from life. Or I'll meet her after work somewhere and we'll sit and talk and you carve that time out. We carve holidays out. Even now, we still carve out our holiday time. We're planning our holidays, even though we might not be able to go abroad or whatever. We're still carving out our holiday because biblically, one of the examples of grace in my life is my marriage. And again, I don't want, people that have struggled in their marriage or are divorced or whatever, I don't want to be critical or damning or whatever, but for leaders, I think it's important that we do take time for our partners. And I think that displays something, that models something for the church as well. And again, we want to build strong marriages and families and whatever. So they're looking to us. They're looking to us for what that looks like. Even my team at work now, they're looking for me to model, not necessarily marriage because I'm not in the church context now, but they're looking for me to model how I live my life. So I'm making sure that my staff are going home to their families at a reasonable hour. At the time. That they're not feeling pressure. That they're not, not feeling they have to be in the office 10 hours. Now we're moving to, this hybrid system. They're working at home because we've learned, same as, lots of people are learning, actually, we can get a better balance for well-being and health and, all of those good things. Sorry, I am going off on
No. It is important. I was speaking to Jules Morgan, one of the executive directors of New Wine, and she recommended a book, Christopher Ash's book on zeal and burnout. The kind of those two things. So
brilliant. I haven't read it.
How do you maintain the zeal and how do you maintain? And it's a good read and a worthwhile pickup. And maybe it's something that we can come back to as a burnout, just talk about burnout and talk about people's experience.
I think it's a huge area. There were periods when I was in Merthyr, here we are, I'll time for honesty, let's pretend there's no one here. There were times in Merthyr I was depressed on the church plant. And the reason for that is I got tired, I got weary, I wasn't looking after myself, I wasn't looking after the kids, I didn't feel I was very useful to people around me, and and then of course with that comes all the guilt. I'm a Christian, I'm supposed to have the Holy Spirit, I'm supposed to be
a leader, you're supposed to be doing this.
Exactly right. And so there's a whole I think get better people in, but there's a whole podcast on burnout, mental health and depression. There's and recognizing that God cares for us in the midst of that as well. I think that's a massive
absolutely thing. Right. And if you're a church administrator, part of a bigger church, part of a bigger team, there's a role for you to care for others behind the scenes. You will see things that others will not. You will notice those things, times where the pastor needs to take some time off and be brave enough to go and make those conversations and go and make sure those things happen. I will try and take pieces of work off Pete or others because that enables them to have a rest. You have to protect yourself, but there is a role to go and protect others. And if you're a church administrator, then please look at and think of how you can serve your team or your minister in that way.
I'm really pleased you said that, Gav, because in some of our churches, our pastors, our leaders, they're unassailable, aren't they? I'm not saying here, but I'm aware of, I know of, and churches where the pastor is this godlike figure. I think church administrators and those serving in that sort of role, you're absolutely right. They're all often in the heart of a lot of stuff that's going on, and they can see some of the reactions of the pastor. They see his honest moments. They're seeing when he's at his most stressful or his weakest. And it's an opportunity then. Remember I said about keeping the gospel central? This is a perfect opportunity to apply the gospel, to remind the pastor, listen, is this, what's going on internally? Why is it happening? Are you reminding yourself of some of these truths? Can I help you?
Yes.
Can I be a servant to you? Can I look? If you're doing this thing, is there someone else who can do this? You're stressed out because you're tired. You haven't seen your wife for 3 weeks, and you've got another meeting tonight. Why don't we call it off? There's a place to say that. These things are just not that important sometimes.
Absolutely right.
I know. Sunday morning is I would argue on a church plant, the only sacrosanct thing is the Sunday morning meeting. The gathering together of the saints, the preaching of God's word. Everything else is stuff. Important. Necessary.
It's strategy, and it's it's all part of the plan. But if
priorities. But if it's you're meeting someone because they've been having a lot of arguments this week. Or the last couple of weeks. Do you know what? Putting that off a couple of days because you're under stress and whatever. You're not that important. That is one of the things to remember is you're really not that important. And sometimes you just put stuff off and just say, "Oh, do you mind if I come around next week? I haven't seen Norma for for 3 weeks. I just want to go for a walk in the park or down by the beach because my head is just in a bad place now." But we're not honest enough to have those conversations.
That's right. No.
So, I do think that is a massive area that doesn't get talked about enough. And particularly for guys that are church planting or in, single leadership roles, it is huge. And I know Pete, is one of the desires of this church is to try and serve. And I know your heart in doing all this, Gav, is to try and serve and to help people to do that. And I think there's a massive need out there.
No, absolutely right. Well, mate, thank you so much for your time today.
Welcome.
And
You're welcome.
You've just got so much experience that we could go in lots of different areas and community, and then church planting was the focus today. And there's some really helpful points there, mate, for people to take our way. And so thanks for doing that.
Listen, it was a pleasure. I hope it's helpful, and I love working with you and everybody here. I love being part of this church. So yeah, it's a pleasure.
That's
Thank
great.
you. Thanks for asking.
And if you've got any questions that you want to follow up on, or do you know what, you want to sit and have a conversation with me or with Tony, we want to strengthen churches. We want to support leaders. We want the gospel to go out. And so if you do have any questions, please send them into info@thechurchoffice or questions@thechurchoffice.co.uk. We'd love to pick them up and love to have that conversation and chat with you. So thank you for listening, and please check out the website for lots of other resources. Please take the time to share and recommend the resources that we've got available to other pastors that you know or other church administrators that you know, that this would be a blessing to more. So all right, goodbye.
Great.
Thanks,
you,
mate.
Gav.